It's California Edition. My name is Brad Pomerance, and we are in Sacramento, and we are joined by Bob Huff. He is the GOP leader in the California State Senate. I've got to say, congratulations, sir. You and the Democrats and the governor came together and negotiated a rainy day fund. That's what it's called. What can you tell us about the negotiation? It seems like both sides got a bit of what they wanted.
Well, yeah, and I think actually I give a lot of kudos to the governor for helping to drive that. He wanted to make sure he got this taken care of before we got into the weeds on budget,
right,
so it didn't get lost and start getting leveraging things. And at the end of the day, I think that we have a pretty good vehicle for the future of California.
I want to talk, though, about what has happened in the past. We have had rainy day funds before. The voters passed a spending cap in '79. They passed a rainy day fund in 2004. They voted one down in 2009. What makes this rainy day fund different from all other rainy day funds?
Well, and you missed the other one we negotiated and never had an opportunity to vote on.
Exactly, that too.
Well, I think what this has, we tried to make sure there was enough going in. We wanted objectivity in it, both in how you get the money in and how you get the money out. And you may remember in January, the governor wanted to just do capital gains.
Right.
That only captures half the volatility in the budget. So we said, we like that. Maybe we'll relax the threshold for that. Let's put 1.5% of the budget on the front end. So we automatically, regardless of what the capital gains is doing, we're putting some money aside.
There's also the question of how and when the money can be accessed. Right. I understand the governor had wanted access to be through a declaration by the governor and a majority of the legislature. Right. The GOP said, not so fast. Right, just everybody says.
Correct.
No. Okay, so what happened?
Well, there again, if the cookie jar's mouth is so large you can reach into it anytime you want, when you're really hungry, there ain't going to be cookies left. And so we tried to make it smaller. You can only take out so much at a time, a little bit more of a deliberate policy, and really to be there when we have emergencies rather than becoming a Democrat slush fund.
What I thought was most fascinating about this is there is an element in the rainy day fund legislation, presumably will go to the voters, that talks specifically about the bullet train. Sir, it's an important issue to you. Tell us about that one little element.
Well, I really can't tell you a whole lot about that element, you know.
But as I understand it, money cannot be used for the bullet train?
Well, we were afraid it would become, because at one point the governor wanted to use it to pay off not just bonds, because they have a portion of the 1.5% could be used to pay off bonds, but also stuff that hasn't really gone to bond level. So it could have been a funding stream for the bullet train. That was our concern, so we nailed that door shut pretty quickly.
What I think is most gratifying, if I may say, is that this deal was struck. It does say a lot about the atmosphere in Sacramento. I was in Washington recently. I had the honor of interviewing several members of Congress, several members of the United States Senate. Not quite as functional. I mean, they have their challenges. But in Sacramento, it does seem as if Democrats and Republicans can get together on some major issues and come to consensus.
Well, I think we've always tried to do that, and certainly if you realize you're never going to get 100% of what you want, you're a lot more likely to get something of what you want. And so many people, it's all or nothing, and particularly the Republicans on the national scene have sort of struck that posture. I don't think it does the people, in the long run any good. And so I think we've come a little different path here in California.
I wonder, though, if the reason why the Republicans got a bit of what they wanted is because the Democrats did not have a supermajority anymore, thanks to, a few members being suspended from the Senate. Or do you think there was genuine desires to create some consensus?
No.
No.
You nailed it.
Oh, really? You think?
Yeah, the supermajority was blown up through no fault of our own, but in that they had to come back to the table because they're talking constitutional amendment for the rainy day fund. That's 2/3 threshold. Otherwise, it would not be robust at all. And we're also in dialogue about a bond, for water. Sure. And that's also 2/3 threshold.
When we come back, I want to speak about the May revise recently issued. Get your thoughts on it. For our viewers on HLN, we thank you so much for joining us. For our other viewers, we'll be right back. Okay, sir, let's talk about the May revise. And it actually wasn't that eventful, I thought. I mean, not a lot of huge developments, a little more money than we thought. But what's your sense of the May revise?
I think the biggest story about the May revision was the governor was holding the line on spending. That's not to say it wasn't spending more than it was last year, because it was. This budget's like $12 billion more than the previous year, but half of that's for debt. And the governor set up a tone early on that, this was not a time to be going out and growing new programs. So you don't see transitional kindergarten funded in there, which is another big new program
that the leadership in the Senate and Assembly desperately wanted.
And, as they negotiate, that may still end up in there, but at least from the get-go, it's not in there, and we're trying to hold the line. The governor set a pretty good framework. So all in all, it's not a bad budget.
Let's talk about debt, because we know that California, while theoretically in surplus, has a tremendous amount of unpaid debt as well as unfunded liabilities. Right. What did you learn through the May revise about those elements?
Well, $340 billion is a lot of elements there. Right. And that's, again, I give the governor credit for a long-term view of trying to pay that down. He helped tackle for the first time really the STRS issue,
right,
which is probably the biggest out of balance component of that, even though it's only $76 billion.
Only.
Only. Right. Mm-hmm. But, and there's going to be some squealing from the local school districts because they're going to be shouldering a much heavier burden. To get to the $4.5 billion annually. We need to be increasing our load to that. But at least the governor is dedicating resources, new revenues, if you will, or unanticipated revenue to help paying off debt, and that's a far cry from where we've been in the past.
Along those lines, though, you know as well as anyone that the last 5 years we saw draconian cuts in the budget because we were in huge deficits. Right. And while we've seen some restoration in some of those line items pre-recession level, a lot of those items have not been fully restored. K-12 is doing all right, but higher ed maybe not so much, social services. Do you feel as if the balance has been struck properly between debt repayment and funding restorations?
Well, I'm not sure what that exact thing looks like, but it's not a bad balance. But we're getting a lot of pressure on the budget now with the Affordable Care Act starting to come in. We have a lot more enrollees in Medi-Cal than we anticipated. We still don't know where that's going, but we've got 30%, almost a third of the population of California now in Medi-Cal, and it's a huge number.
And the governor talked about the Affordable Care Act. What was most interesting to me, I didn't realize this, the federal government will pay 100% of Medi-Cal for new enrollees if they had not been eligible prior to implementation of the Affordable Care Act. But if they had been eligible but hadn't signed up, but only signed up now, the state bears that burden.
Well,
surprise.
No, and it's complicated, and there's some states, not too many, that just didn't even get involved in that whole component because they didn't want to be down the road when this disappears, because he's got a phase out of 3 years on some of these enrollees as well, where the state has to pick up the full cost. So it's a very expensive program. It's a growing program, and healthcare has been one of our largest growing components of the state budget anyway, just all the different people that are on, dependent on it.
In the final analysis, is it better at least to have people in some program rather than going to the emergency rooms?
Yes, it is, but keep in mind we are underpaying our Medi-Cal to our service providers by about 10%. Yes. And if we're ramping up, we can't even pay these guys now, and we're ramping up the more people that are enrolled in the programs, we're going to find health care providers that can't afford to do business anymore.
And we're 50th out of 50 in reimbursement.
And so you have half of the doctors roughly aren't taking new patients they can't afford to.
And you represent parts of the Inland Empire, which is particularly hard hit by a lack of doctors.
Exactly.
And so I can only imagine, what are you hearing out of your communities in the Inland Empire about medical care and accessibility? I mean, Affordable Care Act or not, there's no one taking your plan. What do you do?
Well, and we're finding out that Affordable Care Act's not necessarily affordable, and those that can afford it, they're finding that many could not keep their same service provider. They're getting forced into networks that are smaller. They don't have some of the same benefits they used to have. It's just been a real mess, and this is going to continue to develop. Obviously, it takes a while to implement something new, but I can't say that it's been going swimmingly so far.
So as we look toward the end of the session, the end of the calendar year, what do you make of these last, what will be 2 years? Fairly productive?
I think they'll be productive. Yeah, you got to look forward with the economy on the upturn, even though we have a lot of, high unemployment, high underemployment, but it seems to be turning around. We just need to continue to find out what helps that trend and doesn't discourage it, and do those things, and I think we'll be okay.
Okay, his name is Bob Huff. He is the GOP leader in the California State Senate. My name is Brad Pomerance. We are coming to you from Sacramento, and this is California Edition.